Is depression a universal phenomenon to artists? That's the key question. The answer is clinical depression is certainly not a universal phenomenon. But artists have a certain emotional, temperamental framework that make you, I will include myself within the group, I will speak of us. It makes us more vulnerable to ups and downs, to mood swings, to be more suffering when you are facing certain situations. I would like to start thinking of a Bible character who was not a professional artist. He did not earn his life as an artist. His salary did not come as an artist. But he was a fine musician and he was a great poet. Whom am I talking about? Ah, well done. David was not a professional artist, but he always, from his youth, probably from his childhood, he had the soul of an artist. He had the sensitivity, the spirit of an artist. And I think he kept that artistic sensitivity till the end of his life. So I think we should have David as a model in our mind as we refer to artists within the church or Christian artists, even though he was not a professional artist. I don't know how many of you earn your life, live on, your income comes from your work as artists, but probably it's not a high percentage here. So David was in that category. The soul of an artist, the spirit of an artist, yet having to earn his life as a king.
Full-time king?
Full-time king, but many problems. Many problems. I'm not sure if we had time to play music anymore or to write psalms. You know that most of his psalms were written during the time in the desert, the 18 years he was escaping from Saul. That's not a bad period. 18 years in the desert escaping. Now, you know that the Psalms are filled with expressions which are a kind of catharsis, emotional outpouring of his feelings. I just picked one example. Would you like to read, please, Psalm 31, verses 9 and 10. Psalm 31, verses 9 and 10. Isn't it true that many times we feel identified with this description? Now, this is not a clinical depression at all, but it is indeed almost a universal experience, especially for you as artists. I am in distress, my eyes grow weak with sorrow, my soul and my body with grief, distress, sorrow, grief. My life is consumed by anguish and my ears by groaning. Notice, distress, sorrow, grief, anguish, groaning. I think it's 5, we've said 5. 6, my strength falls because of my affliction and my bones grow weak. Psychosomatic implications of his mood. I think that's a good description, a good portrait to start with. So, let's go to consider our first question. What depression is and what it is not. How to identify if you are depressed. I would like to make a diagram, to draw a simple drawing, but yet I think it will help you, I hope, for the rest of your life. I hope you will remember that, because this is the summary, a summary that can help you. Human personality, our personality as a whole, can be expressed in three concentric circles. Three concentric circles. The first circle, we call it number 1, which is the inner circle, is our temperament. Temperament is our inborn predisposition. We are born with a certain temperament. Temperament is the most genetic, inborn element of our personality. Temperament is biologically determined. It is determined by our genes. We could call this nature. What nature has given us. What nature has given us, temperament. So there are different temperaments, and we are all born with these different temperaments. If you want to go deep into this area, I suggest you read the first chapter of my book, Praying with the Grain. There are still a few copies there. Praying with the Grain, chapter 1 is fully devoted to the area of temperaments. Artists have a temperament, and I'm using here the Jung's classification, which is probably the most accurate to the point that the Jung's classification is the one that led to the famous Myers-Briggs inventory. Myers-Briggs were not original, they just took Jung's classification. It was not their typology, they just copied Jung's classification. So, according to Jung's classification, the artists have by nature predominantly two functions that are more prevalent, and this is feelings and senses, instead of, for example, thoughts. That does not mean then artists don't think. Of course, artists are able to think. But the natural, the spontaneous way to approach reality, I underline that sentence, the spontaneous way how artists approach reality, the first tool you use is your feelings and your senses. For example, let's take the example of a sermon in the church. The first reaction of a thinking type, the first question would be, was it true or was it false what the preacher said? This would be the focus of the thinking type. What would be the focus of the feeling or the sensing, the sensorial type? What is the first question spontaneously? What first comes to your mind when you listen to a sermon? One where you have attended the ELF, for example. So you approach reality more with the feelings and the senses. As we will see later, that will have implications. So this is the first circle. You have to remember that because when we talk about the depression, the pathology, there's one depression that has to do with this circle. The second circle is our biography, our personal history, all that we have experienced since the moment we were born, with our life events, all that influences us. And we call this nurture. Nurture. You are probably acquainted with this playing with words. Nature and nurture. Nature, that we are born with, and nurture, that we receive as we grow. So we are given two suitcases in life. The first suitcase, we can hardly change it because it has to do with our genes, with our biological predisposition. We can very, very little change it. And then another suitcase, another baggage is given to us. This is our history, our personal biography. And thirdly, we have a third circle. Number 3, that is our present circumstances, our current reality. Now, the 3 of them, our temperament, we are born with, our biography, all the events that make a certain framework, the nurturing, and the present circumstances, the 3 of them make the whole that we call the personality. So the personality, it's the sum of the 3 of them. Is that clear to you? Any questions so far? Because from that outline, now we will understand where depression comes from. No questions? Okay. We move then to the second question. Well, it's actually we're still... we move to the second question, and we'll go back to the first one.
Did those 3 come from Jung? Was that Jung's analysis of the personality?
No, not at all. No, this is my analysis. Yes.
What's number 3? Number 3.
Present circumstances. Today's reality. The present problems, the present joys, present circumstances. Yes.
Just a quick question about the interplay between the 3. Are you going to say something?
They are constantly interconnected. Constant interconnection. They are influencing, interacting each other all the time. We cannot separate them. They are a whole. Yeah, that's a good question.
I was wondering what is included in the second. You said biography. Does it include the past and everything?
Yes, of course. It's actually our past. It is actually our past. In contrast to number 3, which is our present. If you want to call it our past, you can. Yes.
So the first could be the future.
The first would be the future. If you are a determinist, then you are. But this is highly determinist observation. I don't think so. This would be a Freudian remark.
Back to the future.
We do not, as Christians, we do not believe that our genes determine our future. And this is the tendency in our society. So your remark was much deeper than you perhaps intended originally. This is the framework, the worldview of modern psychology. We have the gene of adultery. I didn't do it, it was my genes. My genes led me to adultery. And genes explain for everything. But that would be another topic. So we don't believe that our future is there. Not at all.
Is there a relationship between the 3 factors that influences our lives, and we are commonly familiar with the first one being heredity, hereditatea, the second education,
Yes.
and third environment?
Exactly. These are 3 other words for the same. Exactly. For the same. Yes. Heredity, inheritance, our the education and the environment. Yes, if you want to call it this way. I like the words nature, nurture, because it's playing with words. It's easy to remember. And then the present circumstances today. Okay, let's move to depression, which is our topic today. Now, there are basically depressions, 3 kinds of depression relating to each one of the circles. There is a sort of depression that has to do with genetics and the functioning of our brain. A depression when there is a biochemical distortion, disturbance. And this is what we call major depression. Some years ago it was called endogenous depression because it comes from within. There is a kind of biochemical imbalance in the same way that sometimes you can have a thyroid imbalance or some kind of hormonal disorder. So there is something in your brain happening to your neurotransmitters, the endorphins, that affects the way you feel and you behave. Probably you are acquainted with the idea of the serotonin. It's a problem with the serotonin, and the problem is here. This biochemical, biological disturbance that is genetically, usually, it is genetically, has a predisposition, genetical predisposition, is what we call clinical depression or major depression. The percentage of this clinical depression in the whole percentage of depressions is low. It is very low. So clinical depression is exceptional compared to the other sorts of depression. This is why the provocative statement in the introduction that our brother read, where was it? Depression, making depression almost universal among artists should be qualified. Clinical depression is not universal amongst artists. Now, when the problem is here, problems in your childhood, traumas, life events, upbringing that has been causing some deficiencies, not feeling loved by your parents, dysfunctional families, etc., can cause a kind of depression that it is not so abrupt and sudden in its onset, but it's more long throughout the years into such an extent that instead of saying, I have a depression, it started May last year. People usually remember the day when the major endogenous clinical depression started. In number 2, when depression has to do with our upbringing, the person does not say, I have a depression, but I am a depressive person. All my life, I have had a certain tendency to have the symptoms we will consider later. Low self-esteem, difficulty to accomplish things, etc., all the symptoms that we'll consider later on. So here, depression is short period, and here it is much longer. And finally, there are certain life events that when they blow you, they cause a hematoma. It's like an emotional hematoma. This is what we call reactive depression. Depression as a reaction. If you are hit, the following day you will have a hematoma. This kind of reactive depression is the natural response of your body to the blow. The most current and physiological, because this is not pathological. Actually, reactive depression is not pathological in itself. It's a natural response. The most frequent example of this kind of reactive depression, what is it? Bereavement. Bereavement, which is not properly a depression, is fully included here. Loss of employment in the beginning, unless it may go down to clinical depression. But the first stage is when you lose employment, you have a loss there is bereavement, etc. Everything is clear so far? Okay. Now, so basically 3 kinds of depression: the endogenous or biochemical depression, the reactive depression or personality, depressive personality, and thirdly, reactive depression. Burnout. Where does burnout come?
Is somebody able to have like 1 and 3 or 2 and 1, like being the core as well as a?
It could, but it could be a desperate situation.
What we didn't hear.
Sorry, the question is, could a person having one of these once in at life have also the others? Yes, of course. If you have a tendency to have an endogenous depression and you have had a bad childhood and you have bereavement, you may have the 3 at the same time. That's possible. But then I would say you certainly need urgent help because that's tough. That's just possible, but it's exceptional. Okay. Now let's consider briefly about the burnout depression. Burnout depression it's different from this. It demands a different we'll compare. To understand burnout depression, we change the diagram and imagine a reservoir. For example, a swimming pool or any kind of reservoir. I like to use the metaphor of the swimming pool. Now, for a swimming pool to be functioning properly, you need 2 streams of water. Water coming in and also water coming out. A constant movement of water is required in the swimming pool. Otherwise, the water gets stagnated and you can get infections, etc., etc. Now, the swimming pool, the water is our energy, the level of water. We all have certain emotional, physical, spiritual energy. We have energy. For practical purposes, we can divide this energy in physical, emotional, spiritual, but usually it comes as a cluster. It comes together. Let's call it energy, dynamis. Now, what happens when the outflow of energy is bigger, is greater than the inflow, the input? When the output exceeds the input, gradually, little by little, the level of the swimming pool, the reservoir, will be diminishing till it gets a critical point when you have not renewed your energy enough, and that we call burnout. Burnout is nothing less than your reservoir is empty, or at least at a critical level. And this can be shown in depression. I have no more time to talk on this, but obviously the best prevention of burnout is that the input can equal the output. And also from this we understand that the treatment of the burnout is refreshment, renewal, restoration, the 3 R's. Refreshment, renewal, and restoration. How? I think it's up to each individual. Find in which ways you can restore yourself, refresh yourself, and renew yourself, because it depends individually. For example, for the introvert, an introvert person, refreshment and renewal comes from being alone. You renew your energy being on your own. If you make an extrovert to be alone, it's like punishing him or her. It's like punishment. Extrovert people renew their energy in contact with others. Okay? This is why each one of us has to find their own ways. There are many ways to do it, reading, etc. And of course, in our relationship with God. But this would be another topic. Now, how can we identify depression? We go back to the first question. How can we identify depression? In depression, there are basically, it could be summarized by the word loss. There are 3 losses in depression. Depression is a loss. When you are going through depression, you experience a 3-fold loss. First of all, the loss of our own identity. I am a nobody. I am a nobody. I have problems with my self-esteem, identity. Who am I? What am I doing here? What is the purpose of my life? Etc. Let's explore a little bit more. This loss of identity can be expressed in feelings of inferiority. I'm not worth anything as a person. I feel useless. Feelings of inferiority. Feelings of inability. I give up. I can't go on. I can't go on. I just can't go on. I give up. I have run out of energy. And the third way to express this loss of identity is through sadness, the desire to cry, dejection, the expression of this sort of visible emotions. Crying. Perhaps we could add a 4th symptom in this loss of identity, which is guilt. Guilt could be added here. Guilt is a constant feature in depression. Secondly, loss of purpose in life. Loss of purpose. There is no reason for me being here. Indifference to life. Life is not worth living anymore. I'd better be dead. And if this is increasing, then suicidal thoughts, etc. Indifference to life. Loss of interest in everyday tasks. Apathy, especially in the morning. Getting up in the morning is a huge mountain. Isolation, spending long hours in bed or at home without wanting to see anyone. So loss of purpose, all that has to do with the purpose of life. The first is, who am I? The second, what am I here for? And the third loss, hope, the loss of hope. What is the future like? Who am I? What is the purpose of life? And the third, there is no future for me. Pessimism, negative thought about the future. Everything seems to be under a dark cloud, hopelessness. We could add some physical symptoms, but I will not go into more details because I would like to give you some time for questions. Now, depression in the artist, 5 minutes. What happens specifically with the artists? We've anticipated something. Most times, the problem with the artists is not major depression, not even depressive personality, but what we call normal mood swings. Normal mood swings, ups and downs. Now, let's imagine that between these two trails, the mood of the person has normal ups and downs. They are absolutely normal within these trails, and they are affected by the hour of the day, by light. For example, if you live in Norway or in Scandinavia, or if you live in Spain, it makes a difference because the light influences a lot. They are influenced by hormones, the menstruation, the premenstrual period. There are many, many factors, I don't have time, that influence these normal ups and downs. The problem with artists is that because of the hypersensitivity we mentioned in the beginning, your capacity for perception, you perceive more quickly, more things, and more intensely than the average population. I will repeat that. Your perception is higher, quicker, and deeper than the average population. I think this is a constant feature in the artist's soul. And this is a blessing. This is a blessing, otherwise you wouldn't be an artist. If you did not have that extra perception gift, but you have to pay a price. It has a price. It has one good side, it has another bad side. And the bad side is that many times those things that you perceive are not always good, are not always positive. You perceive both the good and the bad, the positive and the negative. This is why the normal ups and downs are increased in the artist because of this hyper perception, hypersensitivity that I insist is a gift. I would add two other reasons why depression in the artist is more, these ups and downs, not clinical depression, these ups and downs are more often. The second reason is that artists usually, as I heard in the beginning, are lonely people. They don't feel understood. They don't feel understood by others. And they have a tendency to be lonely people. I say a tendency. And if you are lonely and you don't feel supported and understood, for example, by your local church, as we said, then this increases. And finally, because I think the third reason why these ups and downs or depression in general is more often occurring in artists is because for you it's much more difficult to earn your life, to get your salary, to live on what you like, your vocation, your calling. The ideal situation is when calling, what you want to do, and your income come together. So when you can earn your life on your vocation, your calling, a very, very high percentage of cases, and I would include writers here too, in most creative professions, many, a very high percentage have to do other sort of works other than the artist's work. You have to be almost a Picasso to earn your life as an artist. If you can be comforted, be encouraged that most Renaissance artists, except the three big names, had also to do some non-artist work.